Claire Whitmore never imagined that the man who once whispered promises against her neck under candlelight would one day throw her out into a freezing storm with nothing but a suitcase and an unborn child. The night had started like any other. A chill wind blew through Boston's narrow brick streets as Claire stepped off the late-night bus, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of the ultrasound photo in her coat pocket. A heartbeat, a tiny flicker of life. She had cried in the clinic's restroom, overwhelmed with disbelief and joy. She hurried home, her boots soaked with slush, excited to tell Travis the news. She imagined his smile, his arms wrapping around her as they planned names, painted nurseries, imagined futures. But the apartment door barely opened before the warmth was stolen. Travis stood in the hallway, shirt half-buttoned, his face tight and unreadable. "You're late," he said, voice clipped. Claire's smile faltered. "I was at the clinic. Travis, I have something to tell you." He didn't move, didn't ask, just crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her eyes searching his for some flicker of emotion. Silence. Then came the cruelest smile she'd ever seen. "Of course you are," he muttered. "Another mouth to feed. Perfect." The words hit harder than the wind outside. She stepped inside, blinking at the shadows in the living room, the scent of cologne she didn't wear lingering in the air. "Who were you with?" she asked quietly. Travis laughed. "Does it matter? I'm done playing house with a charity case. You think this baby's gonna change things?" Her chest tightened. "I thought you loved me. I loved the idea of you. The quiet little thing who didn't ask for much. But now you want more? Responsibility? Commitment? Nah." He grabbed her suitcase from the closet and started shoving her clothes inside. She didn't move. Couldn't. "Travis, please, I'm 6 weeks pregnant. It's cold. Just, let's talk." "Talk? You think I've got time for your sob story?" he snapped, tossing her coat at her chest. "Get out. Go back to wherever you came from." She stood frozen in the doorway, one hand instinctively covering her stomach. "I have nowhere to go." He opened the door and pointed outside, the wind howling like a final warning. "Not my problem." Then he pushed, not hard but enough. Enough to send her stumbling into the hall, coat clutched to her chest, suitcase slamming behind her. The door slammed. And that was it. Claire Whitmore, once a hopeful bride, now a trembling woman on the doorstep of nowhere, pregnant and alone, with the snow starting to fall on her shoulders. But what Travis didn't know, what he had never bothered to ask, was that Claire wasn't just some small-town girl trying to survive on a preschool teacher's salary. She was Claire Evelyn Whitmore, daughter of Evelyn Whitmore, and heir to an empire he couldn't even pronounce. She had walked away from wealth to find something real, and now the man who discarded her would one day choke on the power she'd kept hidden. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Snow clung to Claire's lashes as she stumbled down the icy steps of the apartment building, her suitcase thudding behind her like a final punctuation mark. The cold wasn't just in the air, it was in her bones, her breath, her heart. She didn't cry. Not yet. There was a numbness that settled over her shoulders, a survival instinct from years ago that flickered back to life. She didn't have time to fall apart. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and stared at the contact screen. Most of the names there were acquaintances, co-workers, the kind of people you shared polite nods with in break rooms and church potlucks. Not the kind of people you could call when you were 6 weeks pregnant and homeless. But there was one number she had never deleted. Harold Lynn. Her mother's lawyer, the one who had handled the trust after Evelyn Whitmore died. The one who had looked at Claire with a softness in his eyes and said, "Your mother left you more than wealth. She left you choice." Claire had chosen a life away from the legacy. She had traded marble halls and black-tie galas for children's books, sidewalk chalk, and the smell of finger paint. She had wanted love without pretense. And for a time she thought she had it. Until tonight. She hesitated only a second longer before dialing. The line rang once, twice, then, "Harold Lynn." "Harold," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Claire." There was a pause, then a shift in tone, quiet urgency. "Claire, my God, are you all right?" "No," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. You're in Boston, yes? Yes, I'll send a car. Stay where you are, you're safe now. But go. The call ended. She sank down onto the frozen bench outside the building, her suitcase beside her, one hand over her belly, the other gripping the phone like a lifeline. Within 30 minutes, a sleek black sedan pulled up. A driver in a navy coat stepped out without a word, opened the door, and helped her in. The seat was warm. The air smelled of leather and lavender. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and for the first time in hours, let the tears fall. They didn't stop until the car pulled into the gated entrance of a townhouse in Beacon Hill, one of the old ones with ivy-covered brick and iron balconies that whispered of history and secrets. Harold met her at the door. He was older now, slower than when she last saw him, but his expression hadn't changed. He wrapped a coat over her shoulders, led her inside, and sat her near the fire. "I won't ask you what happened tonight," he said gently, handing her a mug of tea. "Only what you need." Claire looked up at him. The firelight flickered against her damp cheeks. "I need time and shelter, just until I figure out what to do." He nodded as if he had expected that answer. "This house is yours, Claire. It was your mother's before she married. She left it in the trust for you, fully furnished, maintained, ready whenever you needed it." Claire blinked. "I thought everything was tied up in the estate. I thought You chose to walk away from it, not to reject it." Harold smiled softly. "And your mother respected that, but she also knew that life isn't always kind, so she made sure you'd never truly be without a place to land." Claire pressed her hand against her stomach. A flicker of warmth bloomed there, mingling with sorrow, with rage, with the sharp edge of something new. Resolve. She had begged Travis to talk, begged him to listen, begged him for love. Never again. She wasn't the girl from the bookstore anymore. She wasn't just a name on a lease. She was a Whitmore. And soon, the world, including Travis, would remember exactly what that meant. The next morning, Claire awoke in crisp white sheets beneath a vaulted ceiling trimmed in mahogany. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The scent of rosemary and wood smoke drifted in from the hallway, and the sound of classical piano notes echoed faintly through the house. Then it all came back. The storm, the shouting, Travis's sneer as he slammed the door in her face. She turned onto her side, pressing her hand against the gentle curve of her belly. "You're safe," she whispered. "We're safe now." Downstairs, Harold was already waiting with breakfast and a stack of documents neatly arranged beside his teacup. Claire joined him in the sunlit dining room, her hair still damp from the shower, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp with the kind of quiet fury that had crystallized overnight into intention. "You said the house is part of a trust," she began, skipping the small talk. Harold gave her a warm but knowing nod. "It is. The property, several accounts, and your share of Whitmore Holdings." Claire stared at him. "That was all supposed to be handled when I turned 25, but I walked away." "You didn't forfeit it," Harold reminded her. "You simply deferred it. Your mother anticipated hardship. She believed you'd return to it on your terms. That time might be now." Claire nodded slowly, a war forming behind her eyes. "I want access to everything. Accounts, records, assets. I want to know exactly what my name still owns." Harold's brows lifted slightly. "You're ready to step back into the legacy?" "No," Claire said, her voice cool and steady. "I'm ready to use it." For the next several hours, they reviewed documents, portfolios, and real estate holdings Claire hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Beneath the surface of each asset lay potential. Resources that could buy silence, yes, but also ones that could build protection, create change, and most importantly, reclaim control. As the day wore on, Harold excused himself to handle a call, leaving Claire alone in the study. She stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street below. Everything felt surreal. Less than 24 hours ago, she was sobbing on a street corner in the freezing rain. Now, she was standing inside a townhouse her mother once decorated, with the power to reshape her life and the life of the child she carried. She thought about Travis again. His smugness, his contempt, the way he had looked at her, like a burden, like a mistake. She clenched her fists at her sides. For months she had made excuses for him. He was stressed, he was pressured, he wasn't ready to be a father. But now she saw it clearly. He wasn't overwhelmed, he was cruel, and cruelty would not go unanswered. That night, Claire opened a locked drawer in her mother's old writing desk. Inside was a single item, a small black notebook. its leather soft and worn with age. On the first page, in Evelyn Whitmore's elegant script, were 6 words: "For when you must rise again." Claire turned the pages slowly. Inside were contacts: lawyers, media strategists, women's rights advocates, journalists, security firms. Notes scribbled in the margins outlined tactics, scenarios, contingency plans. Her mother hadn't just left her a trust, she had left her a roadmap, a way to survive men like Travis, a way to make sure they never won. Claire felt her heartbeat steady, her breath slow. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to hide. She was going to rebuild. And when she rose, Travis would be the first to feel the weight of the woman he discarded. The next morning, Claire dressed with purpose. Not in grief, not in defeat, but in armor. She chose a tailored navy coat that had once belonged to her mother, smooth cashmere with discreet silver buttons. Her hair, pulled back into a low, elegant bun, framed a face that was no longer soft with uncertainty. She looked at her reflection and saw a woman who had crossed through fire and didn't flinch anymore. She met Harold in the foyer, where a discreet black sedan waited to take them to the Whitmore family office downtown. It had been years since Claire set foot inside that building. The last time she was barely 25, standing on principle, choosing love over legacy. She had no idea then that love would choose to destroy her. As they entered the marble-floored lobby, whispers followed her. Employees glanced up from behind reception desks and laptops. Some recognized her. Others simply sensed her presence didn't belong to a visitor. She belonged to something more powerful. Inside the executive suite, Claire stood before the board, 7 men and 2 women, all older, all startled by her arrival. One cleared his throat and tried to smile. "Claire Whitmore, it's been a long time." She returned the smile, but her eyes didn't soften. Not long enough to forget how to take back what's mine. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Harold, seated beside her, slid a folder across the table. "Miss Whitmore has reviewed the terms of the dormant trust and intends to assume her rights as successor and primary shareholder, effective immediately." One of the men scoffed. "We haven't heard from you in nearly a decade. You walked away from the company. Are we really to believe you're ready now to step into your mother's place?" Claire tilted her head, voice even. "I didn't walk away. I left you space to prove your worth. And from what I've seen of the numbers, you haven't done much with it." The woman at the end of the table, the only one who didn't look dismissive, chuckled softly. "She's her mother's daughter." Claire locked eyes with her. "Damn right I am." Over the next 2 hours, she outlined her intent to take a strategic advisory role within the foundation arm of Whitmore Holdings. She didn't want boardroom status for the sake of it. She wanted access. Access to funding, to public platforms, to the kind of power that could change narratives and protect vulnerable women like the one she used to be. When the meeting adjourned, Harold touched her elbow gently as they exited. "You understand what you just did in there?" he said. Claire nodded. "I reminded them who I am." Back at the townhouse, Claire finally allowed herself a quiet moment. She sat in the nursery she'd begun decorating. White walls, soft earth tones, a mobile with tiny stars and clouds. For the first time since that stormy night, she felt a strange sense of peace. Not because life was suddenly perfect, but because she was no longer a woman waiting to be rescued. She was her own rescue. She looked down at her belly, her hand resting protectively. "You'll never know what it's like to be thrown away," she whispered. "Not while I'm breathing." But peace rarely lasts, because that night an envelope slid beneath her front door. Inside was a photo, Travis, with another woman, laughing, champagne in hand, his palm resting on her hip, and on the back of the photo, scrawled in sharp ink, were 4 words: "You were always replaceable." Claire's blood ran cold, not with fear, but with fury. He wanted her to see this. He wanted her to break. But Travis had no idea. He had just handed her a reason to burn everything down. And this time, he would see just how dangerous kindness becomes when it's been betrayed. She folded the photo, walked to the fireplace, and threw it into the flames. Tomorrow, she would begin phase 1, and the world would soon learn what happens when a woman stops asking for justice and takes it for herself. Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing, not with fear, not with grief, but with a steady, burning clarity. Travis had made one thing brutally clear. He believed she was still the same woman he discarded. He thought she would hide or cry or fade into silence. But he hadn't seen what she'd become. By sunrise, Claire had a plan. She met with Harold in the private office above the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation. The legacy her mother had left behind, and the heart of the power Claire now intended to wield. He listened patiently as she laid out her strategy. "We're going to fund a new initiative," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "Support for abandoned mothers, legal advocacy, housing, job placement. But it's not just about charity anymore, Harold. I want it public, loud, and I want every press release to bear the Whitmore name." Harold blinked, then smiled with slow approval. "Using your pain as a platform?" Claire shook her head. "Not my pain, my power." Within days, press began circling the story. First a few niche outlets, then national headlines. Heiress returns to lead foundation for mothers in crisis. Claire Whitmore breaks silence. No woman should be left in the rain. Claire didn't speak Travis's name. She didn't have to. The world began to connect the dots, and so did he. The first message came through a blocked number. "We need to talk, please." "I didn't know. I didn't understand." She deleted it without blinking. Then came the email. Long, rambling, filled with half apologies and vague justifications. Claire read every word, not to consider forgiveness, but to catalog every lie he still believed. He wrote, "I never meant to hurt you," and she almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly hollow. He had meant to hurt her. He just didn't think it would matter. But now it mattered. And as if the universe had a flair for dramatic timing, that same week, Travis's company, a mid-tier luxury real estate group, found itself the subject of a quiet but growing inquiry. A whistleblower, anonymous documents, misuse of funds, possible tax fraud. None of it tied to Claire, none of it traceable. But she knew how to make a phone call, knew which journalists cared about patterns of abuse, not just to women, but to clients, to employees, to the public trust. One story landed, then another. And just like that, Travis's carefully curated reputation began to crack. He must have felt it slipping, because the next message was more desperate. "Claire, I didn't know who you really were. Let's meet. One coffee, please." She stared at the screen, then replied with a single sentence. "I'm exactly who you thought I wasn't." She pressed send and turned off the phone. But even as she walked away from the digital ghosts of her past, Claire knew this wasn't over. Because men like Travis don't give up easily, especially when the woman they discarded refuses to stay buried. And now, Claire was done burying herself. She was about to step into the spotlight and the storm. Let the world watch. Let him watch. Because she had something to say, and this time, the world would listen. Claire stood in front of the full-length mirror in her penthouse bedroom, adjusting the collar of her navy blue blazer. It wasn't just any day. It was the launch of the initiative she and Harold had worked tirelessly on, the Claire Whitmore Justice Fund, a public-facing legal and social support platform for abandoned mothers. She took a breath. She looked powerful, calm, polished, but inside, her heart beat like a drum. Not out of fear, but anticipation. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Not entirely. It was about rewriting the ending, turning the page on silence, and letting every woman who'd been thrown out, shut down, or left behind know they were not alone. The press lined the marble staircase at the foundation's main building, which had been renovated into a warm, light-filled space with offices, counseling rooms, and even a play area for children. Claire descended slowly, each step measured, each camera flash a reminder. She was no longer the woman who had begged in the rain. She gave her speech with grace and precision. She spoke about dignity, about rebuilding, about her mother's legacy, but also her own. And when she paused, her voice catching just slightly as she said the words, "I know what it's like to be left behind, pregnant, scared, and utterly invisible," there was a silence in the room no one dared interrupt. Afterward, journalists swarmed. Donors lined up to shake her hand, and survivors, dozens of them, waited quietly to hug her. She welcomed every single one. But later that night, when the lights were off and the foundation doors locked, Claire sat alone at her kitchen island. Her son Theo was already asleep upstairs. The city glimmered outside her window. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, there was an ache, not regret, not sadness. A weight. Because when you rise this high, you don't just carry your own pain, you carry the echoes of every woman who didn't get to finish their story. And then, as if summoned by the past itself, her security team buzzed in with an alert. "Miss Whitmore, there's a man downstairs. Says his name is Travis Moore." Claire blinked, the name like static in her ear. She stood, slow and steady. She didn't flinch. "Put him in the lobby. I'll be down in 5. Before she left, she checked on Theo, kissed his forehead, whispered, "Mama's got this." Then she turned to face the man who once called her worthless. This wasn't fear. This wasn't revenge. This was closure. And whatever he had come for, he wouldn't find the woman he abandoned. He'd find something far more dangerous, a woman who had survived and learned to lead, and wasn't scared of storms anymore. Claire stepped off the elevator into the quiet, softly lit lobby lounge of her building. The marble floors gleamed under her heels. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus from the candles her concierge liked to set out in the evenings. And there he was, Travis Moore. He looked nothing like the man who had once stood so tall in a fitted suit, talking about plans and our future. No, the man slouched now, his shirt untucked, hair overgrown, face thinner. He looked up when he saw her, eyes searching, almost rehearsed. "Claire," he breathed. She didn't answer right away, just stood across from him, letting silence do the talking. He took a step forward, but her arms stayed crossed, her expression calm but unreadable. "I've been trying to find you," he began. "I didn't know what happened. One day you were gone." Claire tilted her head just slightly. "Gone? You mean the day you locked me out, 6 months pregnant, with nothing but a suitcase and a warning?" His mouth opened, then closed. He swallowed. "I was in a bad place. I made mistakes. I know that now." "You made a choice," she corrected, voice like ice on glass. "You weren't confused. You were cruel." Travis took another shaky breath. "I've been clean. For 8 months. I've been going to therapy. I lost everything after that night, Claire. You were my rock, and I threw you away. I see it now. I want to be a part of my son's life." Claire's spine straightened. "You don't even know his name," he blinked. "No, I don't." She let the pause hang like a sword between them. "His name is Theodore. Teddy for short. He's healthy, kind, and growing up surrounded by people who know how to love without hurting." Travis's shoulders sank. "I just want a chance." "Why now?" she asked, tone even. "Because you saw the press release? Because someone told you I was successful? Or maybe you Googled me and saw my name attached to a building? No, that's not it." "Isn't it?" She cut in, her voice still calm but sharper now. "You abandoned me when I had nothing. You shut a door in my face and sent me into a storm thinking I was disposable. And now you think you can just appear? Walk back in?" He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Claire took a small step forward, lowering her voice. "If you want to see your son, you'll have to earn it. Not with words, with actions. Through court, through supervised visits, through documented progress. Because I will not let the man who threw us away walk back in on a whim." His eyes filled with something between shame and fury. "You've changed," he said, almost in awe. "No," Claire replied, "I've become." And with that, she turned, heels clicking against the marble, never once looking back. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. Because this time, she was walking away with everything, and he was the one left standing in the storm. The silence of the elevator ride back up to the penthouse was heavy, but not with fear. This time, it was full of clarity. Claire stood tall, her heart still racing, but her spirit unshaken. She had faced the man who once made her question her worth. And she hadn't just survived him, she had overpowered him with grace, truth, and unshakable purpose. When she stepped into the penthouse, Teddy was fast asleep in his crib, the soft glow of the nursery light bathing his tiny face in warmth. Claire walked over, knelt beside him, and gently stroked his cheek. He stirred, then curled deeper into his blanket. A tear slipped down her face, not of pain, but peace. She whispered, "You'll never have to wonder if you're enough, my little love. I promise." The next morning, the sun rose over Seattle with a quiet brilliance, casting a golden sheen over the skyline. Claire sat by the window, a warm mug of tea in her hands, watching the city she had once roamed with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Now, she held the future in her arms, and it was wrapped in soft cotton and second chances. A week later, the Eleanor Sullivan Center officially opened its doors. Mothers from every walk of life walked through those doors. some in tears, others in silence. But each one found a place where no one would be turned away. Claire had poured her soul into every detail, from the playroom walls painted in soft pastels, to the quiet therapy rooms, to the communal kitchen where stories were shared over coffee. She wasn't just giving back, she was rebuilding something sacred. And word spread. Soon, women started writing to her. Letters, emails, messages, thanking her for her courage. Some told her they had left toxic relationships because of her. Others said her story gave them strength to face one more day. A few even showed up just to hug her, to say, "You made me believe in myself again." Claire never called herself a hero. She didn't want applause. What she wanted was a world where no woman felt small, where no child was made to feel like a mistake, where pain didn't get the final word. One evening, as the leaves turned crisp and golden, Claire took Teddy to the small park behind the center. He was giggling wildly as he chased fallen leaves, his little boots crunching against the grass. She sat on a bench, bundled in her coat, watching him through misty eyes. A young mother hesitated nearby, clutching a stroller and looking unsure. Claire smiled at her, patted the bench beside her, and said, "You're safe here." The woman sat down, tears brimming. "I heard about you," she whispered. "Your story, it saved me." Claire nodded slowly. "Then everything I went through was worth it. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about reclaiming her voice, her life, her dignity. She didn't need Travis to say sorry. She didn't need him to understand what he'd lost. She had already won." As the sky turned violet and the stars began to flicker above Seattle, Claire lifted Teddy into her arms, held him close, and breathed in the scent of his soft hair. She didn't need the mansion, the press, or the power. She had what mattered most: love. A love that had risen from the ashes of betrayal. A love forged not in fairy tales, but in real, raw survival. And with that, her story wasn't just a comeback. It was a legacy. If Claire's journey moved you, or if you see yourself in her strength, let us know in the comments. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe, because next we'll bring you another unforgettable story of resilience, hope, and the quiet power of rising again.